Okay, we've got 65 people in already. So we might start. We've got a couple of minutes of introduction, so we'll whip through that now whilst others join. So welcome everyone to today's forum from the Australasian chapter of the International Geosynthetic Society. The topic is geosynthetic supply chains, understanding the challenges. We have 8 industry professionals to talk and explain a little bit of the impact of the current crisis or current conflict is having on different parts of the industry. Just quickly on the IGS overall, the International Geosynthetic Society, over 45 chapters around the world, over 4,000 members. Obviously, the Australasian chapter is one of those. We have a website. We list the benefits of membership. So if you are not a member, or individual or corporate, we'd encourage you to become one. We run webinars. We've got one coming up at the end of April from Chris Lawson, titled Geosynthetic Reinforced Fills Used in Marine Engineering Applications. Be a great one to attend. It's a slightly different view of major marine projects in Asia. Some of the projects are of a scale and nature we wouldn't normally see down in ANZ. So that'll be a great one to attend and learn from. We're running a academic masterclass at the end of 2026 with Professor Tim Stark and Professor Malik Bawaza. This will be our 3rd academic event in the last 10 years. And next year, in August 27 in Perth, we're bringing the Geo ANZ number 3 to Perth. So save the date for the next Geosynthetic conference in ANZ. A big shout out to our corporate members of ACIGS. Platinum and gold members are listed there. It is their annual contribution that allows us to run events and do activities and bring some knowledge back to the engineering community in Australasia. Certificate of attendance is available upon request, so just send an email into that email address. We are taking questions today, so please post them in the Q&A box. Thank you. Just by way of the speakers, we have 2 high-level independent speakers today. So Boyd Ramsey and Tom Sangster, both from Europe, both tenured industry people from different angles. We have Brian Mousley from TAPER in South Australia, a logistics professional, to give some insight into ocean freight particularly. I'll provide a little bit of a regional view of what's happening in Southeast Asia and the impacts being felt here. And then Peter Telepis, Andy Warwick will give an ANZ view, a little bit more granular for what's happening in the ANZ market. Graham Fairhead will offer an installer view, which is slightly different to a product supplier view, different pressures. And Glenn Gillen will wrap us up with a little bit of commentary about a global company and what challenges they're facing. Just to set the scene a little bit around geosynthetic supply chains and understanding the challenges, just an introductory slide showing oil price on the left for the last 5 years. You can see that really since mid-2022, it's been relatively stable, trending down, but the recent conflict has come quickly. And you can see the sharp rise on the right-hand side. Having said that, we have seen oil over $100 a barrel before, and we have survived as an industry. If you were an optimist, you'd say we're just moving from one phase of stability towards another phase of stability. We're just not sure where that next phase is yet. And there's bottom right-hand corner, there's some previous peaks, decade by decade. In dollar terms, some of those prices look low, but if you index them up and put them in today's dollars terms, you can see that what we're experiencing today, we're still short of some of the historical highs. So just to put it in perspective that we've been here before. Just another positioning slide showing that when the crude oil goes to a refinery, the distillation process will break it out into fractions. So it's the same input and then various industries competing for the output. Geosynthetics that are made from polyethylene will require the naphtha fraction at the top there to make the ethylene. One thing that's a lesson for me, even at my age, is that they're not a flexible machine. So they're generally optimized or engineered for specific crude types. So the Asian refineries are optimized typically for crude oil from the Middle East. And switching the crude oil source requires time and money. And just a conceptual supply chain so we can understand the various steps. A crude oil moves from Middle East to refineries. It's transformed into resins or polymers, which is then moved and used in the production of finished goods, which are then moved to a port and then shipped to ANZ locations, moved inland to store in a distributor's yard, and then when ready, freighted to a project, and then a whole suite of projects steps commence. Key points that the Southeast Asian refineries generally import their crude oil from, they're not self-sufficient, multiple freight legs along the supply chain, and there's also varying stock levels. At the start of the conflict, there would have been various stock levels along the supply chain. So with that, having set the scene, I'll hand over to you, Boyd, and you can take us from there.
Greetings, and excuse me, and thank you all for participating. Let me get my slides queued up here. And how we looking? Looking at the right thing, Brandon?
You are. It's you're just in slide mode though, Boyd. There we are. Perfect.
Super. Okay. I'm going to provide kind of a high-level overview. We have multiple qualified speakers to address specific topics. I would thank the Australasian chapter for coordinating this. We said we were allowed to put little adverts out, so here's my first advert. You can find me on the web easily. And they requested that I use the Australasian format, which I did, but you see the little block out there. These are my opinions and my opinions only. What I'm saying hasn't been sanctioned or approved by any of the industry organizations I participate in. My bona fides, the reason you should be listening to me. I've been doing this for over 30 years. I've been through 4 or 5 of these crises, depending on what you call a crisis. So I have some experience. My sources of information, I read a lot. I'm 66 years old. I'm semi-retired, still do consulting work, but I take time to read these sources every day. Some of them are, the China Daily is simply a political production rag, but you get good information when you read information from papers around the world. I still talk to people. I pay for most of the information I get. Robert Heinlein, one of my favorite authors, anything free is worth what you pay for it. You didn't pay to get into this seminar, so keep that in mind. Let me say a word first about what I call doomsayers. And this has been going on for a long time, since the book of Revelations. There's always some guy walking down the street with a big sign that said the end is near. We're all going to die tomorrow. Internet, social media accelerate this. Everybody's got a big microphone. But I would urge you to look at things with facts and figures. I normally recommend books in my presentation. One of the ones that I think everybody in the world ought to read is by Lachlan Smil from Manitoba, How the World Really Works, the science behind how we got here and where we're going. And he's published another book that strictly uses math, but he describes, there's this many people in the world, therefore we need this many calories, therefore we need this many hectares of farmland producing at this rate. It's not opinion, it's math. And if you're young and want to look online, there's a blog called The Honest Sorcerer. He is a bit of a doomsayer, but he also bases his recommendations and decisions on mathematics. So I'm not here to tell you that the world is ending, but I'm also going to tell you that if you think things are going great, you're not paying attention. So let's lay the groundwork with a few facts. On February 28th, the USA launched the operation called Epic Fury. As a U.S. citizen, I apologize for us bombing people. I've done that for many years. This effectively closed the Strait of Hormuz beginning March 2nd. Just a reference, several hundred ships normally transit that a day, so in a normal time period. So when you read, 20 ships got through, don't think that's a big deal. In our industry, the result of that has been multiple geosynthetic price increases being announced that started in mid-March. Shortly after that, there were letters sent warning of limited product capability. Some of the countries have started rationing gasoline, but no one has yet announced, either on the polymer side or the resin side that I'm aware of, that there are restrictions and allocations, although that's certainly possible. Another fact that I want to pass along every time I get in a discussion about Israel, the population of Israel is roughly equal to that of the city of Philadelphia in the United States. I don't know when the last time you read an article about Philadelphia is, but those two are equal in population. So the situation we're in, there are two paths of impact. One is the global resin supply, petrochemicals, and the other is container shipping. On the petrochemical side, Brendan gave a short overview. I would expand that to say, you need to remember that there are several steps in this, from the crude oil point to monomer to polymer to geosynthetic. So we're at the end of a very long train. And all of those steps, as Brendan mentioned, are complex. You can't just turn a polymer plant into making something from a different polymer. It doesn't work that way. So we're at as I said, my message there is we're at the end of a long train. Global shipping is going to be discussed. We have a person not of our industry to give us some information. My comment is that this should be at least similar to COVID. And this assumes diesel fuelability, which I would not say is a guarantee. Over the course of my career, there are three things that cause societies to change, governments to make action. These are water, food, and gasoline. You'll note that there have been strikes on desalination facilities. That concerns me. Food is a short-term shipping issue. I don't think there's going to be a global famine, but there is longer-term concern on fertilizer supply, much of which goes through the Strait of Hormuz. And diesel supply is probably my biggest concern, although it's a little strange, but I'm a little worried about helium. Helium is shipped through the Gulf in large quantities and used for a lot of highly technical things that our society produces. I do a lot of work in sustainability. A couple comments here. We are all interconnected intimately. And if you don't think of that or realize that, you're wrong. There is no valid differentiation for us and them, even though our politicians try to create those differences to influence us. We're all in this together, everybody. And I put this in the opinion section, but it's a fact. Human society does not have sufficient resources and options to sustain the current population if we use 20% less crude oil. We simply can't do it. So my suggestions to you, expect volatility. A longer duration conflict is going to be worse. I worry that this is a religious war and not a war over resources. And if you look back at the Crusades, religious wars last a long time. You should deal with your established suppliers. People who have been in this industry a long time have managed these situations in the past. And I would warn you about substitutions. If someone, if you can't get something and you look for it somewhere else and somebody comes to you with a deal that's too good to be true, it probably is too good to be true. In every case I've been involved in, people have used substitute products that have not been good substitutes. So that's all I have. I'll turn over to the next speaker. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Boyd. Next speaker will be Tom Sangster. So Tom, provide a little bit of the European context.
Yep, let me just cut my slides. Yep, On slideshow, there we are. Right. Hopefully you're seeing this. Go back to the first one. So good morning from me, afternoon for most of you. I'm Tom Sangster. I am the director of Downley Consultants Limited, which is a engineering and business consultancy in the geosynthetics field, based in Europe but working worldwide. So I'm going to take the view from Europe, explain a little what's going on here, how the industry here is slightly different in structure and the market is different in structure from what you're used to in Australia. So the European geosynthetic sector. Firstly, there's overcapacity in a very fragmented industry. There are many manufacturers across all product types, certainly 6 GCL manufacturers, probably without much difficulty, 15 to 20 non-woven geotextile manufacturers. Most are small, they're privately owned, limited economies of scale, they don't have any scale, limited investment capacity, possibly not the greatest balance sheets to be able to carry them through a crisis. So at the supply end already, people are concerned just about simple survival of these small businesses. Europe also suffers from very high labour and energy costs. And so for products like PE geomembranes, where those are the can be big inputs to your costs, there's already not much margin to play with. Energy costs will look later, but LNG costs 5 times as much in Europe as it does in the USA, for example, just the basic energy. Our markets are heavily regulated. There are rules, regulations all over the place. Changing raw material sources is not easy. For example, in Germany, products to be used in landfills, every component in the geosynthetic has to be approved. So if you've got a GCL, you can't just go to a different fiber supplier. You've got to go through the whole thing. So you're very much tied into your supply chains. I would echo what Boyd has said. Yes, running around and substituting is not really a great idea. But even if it was a possibility, we tend not to have that in some of the regulated parts of Europe. Margins are very tight. I think you'll probably be familiar with this. There is strong Chinese competition now appearing in Europe, especially in relative commodity sectors like geotextiles and certain geogrids. And it's a very seasonal market. We have a big swing between winter and summer. This is spring now. So we're just getting into the busy season. The manufacturers build stocks during the winter period. So buffer stocks of finished goods are reasonably high in most cases. I mean, people try not to have massive stocks because it's working capital, but that part is in good shape. Overall demand is weak. There is not much growth in the market. We have a heavy reliance on public sector infrastructure budgets here. There's, unlike Australia in particular, the mining sector is much less significant here. And central governments in Europe are shifting their priorities towards defence after the Ukraine war. So even without this current crisis, not a happy picture in Europe. So what's been the impact of the war so far? Well, the obvious one, Boyd alluded to this, as did Brendan. This is what raw material prices have done. Just in the months since the attack started, we're looking at oil up 42%, polymers up 29%, just in a month. Energy prices, really important here. Heating oil up 50%, natural gas, which is a big source of energy, up 72% in the month and 97% in the year. Electricity, it's a very complicated market. There's no fixed price you can find. But typically people are paying 50% more than electricity than they were at the beginning of the year. And all this feeds into horrible costs. So where does that leave geosynthetic? This is what we've seen in March. Geomembranes price increases announced of the order of 25%. Geogrids, geocomposites, and geotextiles, again, ranges 15 to 20%. Some people are waiting. Some people have gone already with price rises. Geomembranes obviously have a massive cost input from raw materials and energy. That's the big cost element, which is why they're most hit. Things like GCLs and GCCMs, which have a large component of non-polymeric or non-geosynthetic materials, they're less heavily affected. So we're seeing 5 to 10%. But this is just what's been announced already. No guarantee it isn't going to just keep going and keep going. So across the board, we're seeing a range generally, I suppose, on average of 18 to 20% is typically, if you took geosynthetics as a whole, where we would be now compared to a month ago. And still going. The warning letters have been sent out, situation's unstable. People are only announcing very, very short validity periods for quotes. So it's tightening in that respect as well. As I say, the biggest impact, products with high raw material energy cost content. Instability in supply. This is the worrying one. If it's just price, you know what you're dealing with, but will we be able to get material? I'm seeing refiners already claiming force majeure, which enables them to stop and to do all sorts of things. Basically, all previous bets are off. So that's hitting procurement, production planning, and pricing. Very, very difficult to do any of those things. And manufacturers have insufficient margin really to absorb cost increases. They're not sitting on fat margins. So the cost increases have to go through to the customers. And that's, some customers are just not going to go ahead with project. Chinese competitors are gaining more competitive advantage. They have lower raw material and energy costs. And despite the shipping challenges, they will continue to push. They have a lot of capacity and probably a greater capacity for pain than Western cultures. So they are going to be less disadvantaged, and we could see the market changing with higher penetration from them. The outlook, the very end.
7 minutes, Tom.
Yep. We're going to see continued volatility in pricing and the supply chain. The practical challenges are similar to COVID. We've experienced it before. We learned lessons. Boyd referred back to this. So there's valuable experience in managing these challenges. But it's not all doom and gloom. The fundamental value proposition is still there. Geosynthetics give improved performance, lower cost, lower environmental impact. We mustn't lose sight of that, the benefits. It's a resilient industry. But the last point is one Boyd made as well. The thing to avoid for asset owners and specifiers is to prioritize availability over performance. We'll buy anything just because it's available. Substitution, as Boyd put it. Much less risky to accept higher costs or to delay the projects than simply to accept any available alternative, chuck it in, and hope for the best. I think we must, as an industry, aim to ensure that doesn't happen. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Appreciate it. As outlined in the supply chain slide, there's a number of steps where goods, where ocean freight or road transport comes into it. So Brian Mousley from Taipei will give us an overview of what he's seeing as a logistics professional.
Thank you, Brendan, and thank you for the opportunity to speak at your webinar today. My name is Brian Mousley. I'm the Managing Director of Taipei. We are just over 50 years in business. We're licensed customs brokers and international freight forwarders. Even though we're based in Adelaide, we operate through every port in Australia and New Zealand, as well as have an extensive network of agents that have been very long-standing and similar to ourselves. They're owner-operators, not part of any consortium or conglomeration. Just to pick up on what a couple of the other guys have said regarding the experience we're going through now, relating it to COVID, the biggest difference between COVID and the Iranian situation is that the Iranian situation is probably a little bit more acute in some ways, but it doesn't affect the whole world as COVID did. I mean, COVID affected all of the ports around the world through exactly the conditions that we all had to live through, whereas it's seemingly at the moment the biggest issue with the Iranian situation is the fact that it's strangling the world in terms of the cost of energy and the supply of the raw crude to be able to produce different products, which of course affects you guys probably more so than most. I haven't got any slides, but I've prepared a little bit of a spiel here to give you a bit of an idea of where things are at pretty much at the moment. The global shipping industry has actively been diverting vessels originating from most northern hemisphere origins away from the Suez and Red Sea for more than 2 years. Major container shipping lines, including Maersk, Hapag-Lloyd, CMA CGM and MSC, originally ceased using this route after the Yemeni-based rebel groups began seizing commercial vessels in retaliation for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. The alternative routing via the Cape of Good Hope has therefore been in place for some time. This has not resulted in significant increase in transit time, but also the sea freight costs have increased. Although discussions are underway in recent months to reconsider the Suez transit, the escalation of the current situation has halted all progress. Passage through this area is no longer permitted and extended routing remains in effect. The additional 10 to 14 days of transit time is something the Australian market has been managing. However, further impacts are expected as carriers implement what are known as blank sailings, which is they'll advertise the sailing and then all of a sudden the vessel will not carry forward on that particular schedule. So it's in fact the blank sailing, nothing happens. So they do this to maintain full vessel utilisation and still provide some degree of a regular service to their customers. Of course, this is particularly pertinent to cargo going into and out of the Middle East, with volumes virtually ground to a halt now. For export cargo out of Australia into the Gulf states, there are ways of doing it through Turkey or through Saudi, for argument's sake, but you're talking double, triple the normal cost. There's very little, to my knowledge anyway, that is actually coming out of the Gulf states. That's pretty much stopped in its tracks. One very important thing that people may not be aware of, and that is the insurance implications of this as far as the shipping lines are concerned. Again, to pick up on what's been said previously, best guess is that there are somewhere between 1,000 and 2,000 commercial vessels stuck, of which over 1,000 of those are container vessels. Now, those vessels all, generally speaking, are of the capacity of somewhere between 3,500 and about 12,500 to 15,000 20-foot equivalent container units. So quick go at the maths there will tell you there is not an insignificant amount of cargo that's held up. In addition to that, they're again approaching somewhere of the order of 20,000 seamen that are stuck on these vessels in the Gulf that are not going anywhere, which once again is obviously causing a fair amount of grief for those poor souls that are sort of stuck there. The insurance side of it though, most of the insurance companies that offer marine insurance have either declined or they had a cut-off time for it, which is now well and truly exceeded. So pretty much anything that's floating around out there is not being covered by insurance. So once again, if anything happens, it'll be down to the vessel calling what is called a general average, where all of the shippers and consignees will be required to lodge a bond in order to get their cargo or what's left of the cargo. So it could end up being a very messy situation. The bigger, or another bigger issue is the fact that this is going to take a while. Even once these guys stop fighting with each other, it will take quite some time for the trade lanes to get back to normal. that in turn is going to continue on with the issue that, again, particularly in Australia, exporters are facing a lack of containers because there is again a deficit in terms of the amount of containers that are going or cargo that should be going out of the country that can't go because of the lack of containers. Similarly, as I mentioned before, the supply of containers coming southbound out of Europe are now taking anything up to 90 days, particularly from Northern European ports, which further puts more strain on the supply lines as far as the availability of cargo. Cost is obviously another issue, even though the world, or those parts of the world that are not involved directly in the conflict, we've seen a pretty steady increase in bunker adjustment factors since the beginning of March. It hasn't quite doubled in price, but we're heading upwards at a rate of anywhere between $100 to $200 US per 40-foot container per week. And at the moment, we're probably just somewhere around $1,000 US per 40-foot container on top of where we were when this whole conflict started. Thank you very much. Appreciate your time, and let's enjoy the rest of the webinar. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Brian. Right on 7 minutes. I'll do a quick overview of what's happening in Southeast Asia. Hopefully there's my slides. Sorry, let me try again.
We saw the cover slide.
Saw the cover slide, okay. Okay. Might have to stick with this view. So just 2 slides on Southeast Asia. Most of the geosynthetics for ANZ are either produced in Australia or imported from the region, either India, China, or Southeast Asia. You do get some niche products from European or American producers, but they tend to be lesser with all the regional supply opening up. You can see on the left-hand side just an extract from an Australian newspaper just confirming that, most of the oil that comes out of the Gulf is coming to the Asian refineries, which then gets converted into products such as naphtha, which then gets converted used in production for products such as plastics or geosynthetics. So you find that the Asian geosynthetic producer is sourcing raw materials from regional refineries, from regional supply chains, derived from regional refineries. And most of the crude oil coming to those refineries are coming out of the Middle East. So there is actually some stress on that supply chain already. So the pace and scale of the disruption will differ. Some products will be more immediate. Some products will be higher than others. Some countries have got a little bit more, some countries got refining capability, some countries don't. Producer by producer will all have different stock levels, and the impact on the supply chain will vary slightly. Key theme is there's widespread disruption and discomfort. The other point to note is that it's changing quickly and regularly, so the quote validity periods are shorter throughout Asia. Product costings are being done regularly and quickly, and generally it's first come, first serve, supply locked in early, all the terms agreed. So it sounds a little bit messy at the moment, but it is a little bit, there's a lot of stress in Southeast Asia around the production side. One opportunity is maybe there'll be some creativity along the supply chain. So producers that are multiple sourced will have a little bit more flexible, in terms of they'll have pre-qualified supply chains. Others that are single sourced will be a bit narrower, and have a take higher stress. So everyone's feeling the pain around resin cost and availability. Selling prices are rising in Southeast Asia. There will be additional increases as well for packaging and cores, energy and so forth. That's already spilling through. We are seeing Chinese producers increase their selling prices. We are hearing that the resin prices are up significantly inside China. I'm unsure of the freight impact from China to Southeast Asia or China to other markets, but certainly the largest in terms of number of producers in China, they're also taking strain. There is a risk, and this is just chatting to people around the region in the last week or two. If countries start to ban the export of polymers, or alternatively use the words to prioritise their citizen over trading partners, which basically means there is a risk that someone like China may just say, you can only buy finished goods. We're not allowing the export of polyethylene or the export of yarns or resins. However, the consistent theme to date has been that the base polymer pricing has increased greater than 40%, regardless of what you're buying, whether it's PE, PP or PET. It's probably gone up even higher since I wrote that a few days ago, and it's coming. The strain is not diminishing. You can see there product by product a little bit of variation. So even though it's a common theme, some have moved quicker and higher than other products. So geomembrane is more immediately impacted. It tends to be a high volume, lower margin product. Price increases or decreases get passed through more rapidly. Non-woven geotextiles, stock levels may vary a little bit, but they tend to be held more in stock than other products. So therefore, there could be a little bit of a shock absorber there, but that's already running out. We're seeing selling prices increase in Southeast Asia, including from Chinese imports to various countries. And certainly on geogrids, polyester wovens, PET yarn, which is a base yarn for some of these products, as well as PP resin. The prices are up, the supply is constrained, particularly PET yarn, where the most common source in the last few years was China. So there's a little bit of pressure. Other products, as Tom mentioned, can be a little bit mixed because of the different types of the variation of raw materials that head in there. But certainly they will not be immune from price rises as well in terms of the cost of raw materials and then getting passed on. And just the numbers I mentioned are just kind of anecdotal. So it's just talking to people. Don't take these as hard facts because it is changing. I would say to you 40% is, we've already passed that 40% already. So we're probably more like 50, 60% increases in raw materials in Southeast Asia. So just on that note, I will stop sharing and I'll head to Peter Telepis and he'll provide a bit of an overview of ANZ experience.
Thanks, Brendan, and welcome to everyone, and thank you for the opportunity to speak this afternoon. I'll just share my screen. Brendan, you might guide me that you can see that.
We can see you're in slide mode if you want to move into presentation mode.
Yep, I'll do that.
Otherwise, just work with those, Pete.
I had it already, and
Peter, you can click the icon which is next to zoom out on the bottom left, right hand side. Just next to the minus, the first next to the minus.
Yeah. Sorry about this. Just let me. Can you see that?
It hasn't changed, Pete, but maybe just in the interest of time, move forward on the. Oh, you've lost.
Sorry, I'll just try and bring this up. Sorry. Give it one more go, Brendan. Sorry. Can you see that?
Yep, see the slides.
Yep. The slides? Yep, okay. All right, perfect. I'll just try and get to... apologies for that. I'll change that quickly. Okay, I'm assuming everything's good. Apologies for that. So my name's Peter Talibas, as Brendan said. I'm the Executive Director for Fabric Australasia, an Australian-based manufacturer and importer of materials, geosynthetic materials. Today's presentation and my quick talk will be largely around what we've been observing and managing in the Australian New Zealand markets. We do have Australian manufacturing, not a lot of it, but it is mitigating some supply risks. Most of the raw materials that are coming into the Australian manufacturing plants are sourced from Asia and some local recycled polymers. The impact from a Gulf so far has not been all that prevalent as some of the other presenters and comments we've heard so far. There are, though, in the last week, and I think Brendan said each day is a new challenge and it's presenting new pressures across the board. So we are seeing some Asian sources putting the brakes on a little bit in relation to the prices have gone up, but the amounts you can source, price increases across all sources, whether you're buying raw materials or finished goods. One of the other things I'll talk about a little bit today is freight pressures and supply chains and the impact potential of fuel rationing across Australia for diesel, which is a main transportation fossil fuel that's required for our trains and road freight. Pricing validity is a real big concern at the moment, and most pricing validity doesn't last for more than up to 7 days or less at times. Freight validity is daily, and the contingency, especially around the local supplies, I would say it would be a safe bet that we've got probably 3 or 5 months of local manufacturing and bulk raw materials that has been a bit of a build-up. Just to give everyone a bit of an overview on the Australian and New Zealand supply chains. I mean, we've got Australian manufacturing, there is capacity there, and at this stage for geotextiles, predominantly non-woven, continuous filament and staple fibre type products, PET and polyprop, a geosynthetic clay liner line, various and multiple manufacturers of drainage pipes, whether it's PVC, polyprop or HDPE, and various conduit pipes for the housing and residential, and various composites that are reworked in Australia. So the manufacturing presence around not only containment and landfill, but general construction, whether you're looking at building or road or large infrastructure, is sort of supported by some local Australian manufacturing, but by far it's not. It is dependent on imported solutions, as we know, geogrids, geomembranes, geonets, all made overseas. Predominantly the supply chains with most of the operators and suppliers in Australia is Asia, and geotextiles, GCL and composites do get imported. When we look at the resins and fibres that go into the materials that we're at least making locally, we can see the spikes, and whether you want to call it 30, 40%, I think at the moment we're sitting in a fairly volatile period, especially with Asian suppliers where they're all at times naming their price. But we can see on the left, PET fibre grade coming out of Asia, that huge spike that came in February once the crisis commenced. Then we look at PVC. There's a lot of talk on the media, especially with the housing industry and commercial buildings. It will come to a standstill because there's not enough PVC pipe. But again, resin prices there have jumped, substantially over 30%. And then just another one there showing polyprop fibres. But this is the volatility that we've had to play with in a very short period of time with those spikes across those three graphs. Trade and logistics, it really doesn't change here that much, apart from one observation that we see sea freight especially, the trend coming down from where it's been from the peak of September 25. But again, our dependency on raw materials, regardless of the indexed sea freight, is still being influenced by the high cost of resins that we're having to purchase on the open market. But road freight, the one in blue, is the one that is hurting a lot of us in Australia at the moment, because a lot of the materials are moved around the country from port to projects and from port to manufacturing plants and from offices and warehouses to sites by rail and road. More importantly, diesel rationing is the one area that we're all concerned about, bringing the industry to a standstill. And more importantly, the impact of the pricing on diesel and the levies that are being hit by the various companies. But when we look at the key shifts in the Australian freight costs, obviously road freight fuel surcharges, we've seen those sharp increases, especially at the gate prices. Sea freight volatility, even though we've seen a bit of a softening spot. Structural sea cost reset, I mean, that's a little bit in play and contentious depending on where you're sourcing products for. Something that's really relating to Australia now is the road labour and admin pressure based on all these extra costs, and obviously driver labour costs up 4.8%. Rail cost resilience, a little bit cheaper, but again, you're paying for more days of travel time. So if we want fast and efficient deliveries to site and to projects, it will take longer. And then there's a constant barrage of increases by government, whether it's the road user charge. There's another one that escapes me. But I think what all this predominantly, and we're an island, so we don't know if the world will want to ship us product or polymer, but we're basing it on that we're friendly people here in Australia, and the world may lend a bit of leniency to us. We are resilient at the moment. I think there's probably enough supply on the ground across most of the Australian companies that are trading, probably not for a very long time, but there is still some capacity. And we are a small market, so we don't need a lot to keep our market going, but short validity periods, especially for our customers, and I've got some customers listening to me now. I mean, it's just increasingly hard to give certainty and to give stability and at times scale of any increases because they're just really, really hard. So commercials, managing price, and one of the other aspects of some segments is the coordination of different materials. So you may have a project that you can get easily access geotextiles, but you can't get geomembrane. But apart from that, difficult times, but we are managing, and there is a little bit of resilience. So thank you.
Thanks, Pete. Appreciate it. And Andy Warwick from Global Synthetics will give also an ANZ view as well from the little bit more country focus.
Yep. Okay. Obviously, a lot of what's been discussed today, there's a lot of duplications, a lot of overlap. I'm also mindful of time, so I'm going to try and be a little bit quicker so we can catch up for the Q&A, which I know a lot of people want. A lot of people here know the Australian sector. What are the big sectors? Mining and waste management. Two huge sectors, two huge consumers, especially of HD geomembranes. But transport is also equally very big. But that's your geogrids, geotextiles, and your drainage materials more than anything. Hydraulic engineering is a little bit more sporadic in how much that's used, and then environmental and water resources. A lot of material does get imported, and I totally agree with Peter, and he summarized that very well. A lot of stuff comes in, a lot of stuff is made here too. This one I won't dwell on because I feel this has already been covered enough by enough people and the impacts. But container availability, the cost of fuel, driving at cost, but lead times is another big factor as well that's also increasing now because of container availability. So instead of being, let's say, 6 weeks for something to come in on a container, it could be more like 8 to 9. That's just an example. So it's pushing out, and it will continue to push out just like it did during COVID. And then the availability of fuel, especially in regional areas, that's started to be seen now. That's started to hurt. So the options, yes, this is an interesting one because I know Boyd comment and Tom's earlier on. Companies are seeking alternative materials. That is happening. But companies are cautious about countries that are not necessarily well established. So they're sourcing from places more in the Northern Hemisphere if they can. Europe is well established, the Americas are well established. So they feel more confident and they feel more safe sorting these materials. But it does present another challenge. The Americas and the Europeans don't necessarily produce and make materials to the same standards that we make here in Australia in terms of auditing guidelines or governance guidelines that we have. But then other options are, could the guideline be relaxed a little bit? If it works in America, if it works in Europe and other parts of the world, does an environmental agency or a road authority have to be as strict and stringent as they have become over the years? Other things that operators are looking at is, can the project be delayed? If you take something like a landfill cap with the consent of an agency, you could push it out for 6 months. Let things calm down, let things settle down. You could save you money. Yes, you still got things like leachate management to consider and everything else on always risks and gases, but there are things like those scenarios. We're certainly seeing that firsthand. A lot of jobs are being pushed out. They are being pushed back. The mining industry is notorious for doing it when the mineral price is low. They delay a job. When the mineral price is high, they push ahead. So they're good. But Australia is very resilient. They are used to this. They went through it very well with COVID. It is short validities. The prices are hiking. And if they have to pay for it, they understand it. And it does have to get pushed on. There was no joke in those comments from Tom especially. The margins in this sector is not huge. It's very hard for the industry to absorb them and have no choice but to pass it along. And it gets passed along right the way from the raw materials and producers to the ocean freight to suppliers to the road freight. It goes right through the line. Everybody passes it on. And ultimately it's the client or the money man who gets hit. But you work together, you collaborate together. And sometimes other scenarios are, okay, we can't get this material. Is there an alternative engineering option here? It's still using geosynthetics, but maybe it's a little bit more creative than what's been traditionally prescribed. Combination of what is available could actually achieve the same outcome. Can be more expensive, could be, but it'll still enable a project to work safely and in line with what the original design intent was. So there's a lot more creative thinking to go on during this period of time. I think it will be quite adaptive. I think it'll be interesting for the geosynthetic industry because I think new technologies may come out or new concepts may come out. And it's a time will tell. So hopefully that gives you a little bit of time back, Brendan.
Thanks very much, Andy. Appreciate it. The next speaker we have is Graham Fairhead from Fabtech. Slightly different angle, not a product supplier, Graham, but an installer sitting between I guess the head contractor and the product supplier. So you've got a whole different set of challenges and experiences to share.
Thanks, Brandon. Yes, I suppose slightly different perspective because we're more of the buyer of the materials, and most of the conversation has been around the suppliers of materials. Broken my contribution to 4 elements. One is technical risk. A large part of the Australian market, certainly the market that Fabtech works in, is quite technical, quite highly regulated. And therefore technical risk is a very significant issue. The good geosynthetic manufacturers have a manufacturing system that produces excellent quality product, and part of that system is the material that they purchase, the raw materials, which works well in their machinery. They've proven it works well, they've adapted. If you change that raw material, you start changing the system, and you can get a less reliable, less stable production process, creating technical risks. Not all raw materials are the same. That might say the same thing on the label, but they do need to be validated to ensure they're going to work in the equipment manufacturers have. I think that he mentioned that some manufacturers have multiple raw material sources prior approved, so that gives them more flexibility under these kind of circumstances. Not to forget also that some specifications in Australia have controls around the raw materials and the production batches requiring to be single entities or test regimes that back into batches, and that needs to be considered if the raw materials are being changed. Obviously, sourcing a different or lower specification raw material needs to be undertaken with caution. Somebody also touched on the idea of using different suppliers, different finished goods suppliers. Great care should be exercised there. Most suppliers in Australia have some history and can demonstrate that they're able to produce quality product, and straying away from those suppliers obviously creates additional risk. And also technical risks lie around some of the pre-qualification of products. Landfill is one example, often require 1 or even 4 times stress crack testing within 12 months to demonstrate competence and avoid having to do those tests on the produced materials. If you switch to a different source, you may not have that data available to you. Also quite common in Australia is to do project-specific testing, be that durability testing of geomembranes or friction testing of systems, or strain-related testing that then locks you into using those particular products. And if they're no longer available, that becomes a challenge, a supply challenge. Overall, recommendation: work with your trusted supply partners to get the product that you need. Second issue is timing. Stocks generally in Australia are relatively limited for the products that we source, the more specialty products that we source. They're very often project specific in some way or other, hence the stocks are low, made to order. And that applies not to finished goods, but also to the raw material stocks, which are obviously being depleted. We're now experiencing a number of products where there are no finished goods, and the raw material stocks are becoming in very short supply. There's a redistribution going to occur. There's less capacity in the world today, and what will fix that, if nothing changes, is price. Price will cause the producers to sell to the best price, and those with less appetite to purchase will be able to afford the products. Longer supply durations. The Middle East is relatively nearby. Other sources are further away, so longer shipping routes, longer durations. And also at the moment, most Asian producers are pretty committed people are anxiety driven in terms of procurement, placing orders for projects, but also for stock. And that means most lines are tied up with orders until June. So placing a new order today, if the raw materials are available, the production won't be until July. We always like to minimise storage of materials to avoid any risk of damage, and with this disrupted supply timing, there's an issue around some goods being available on site and being stored, and others arriving late, and therefore a risk of damage from being stored. Overall message in terms of timing: order early. Commercially, there's been a lot of conversation about what's driving price. From a purchaser's point of view, to a certain extent, the bigger risk is volatility. The fact that you don't know where the price is going to be tomorrow. The pricing security is less. Typically, we would enjoy 30 days price validity. That's reducing all the time, and certainly shipping, very often there's very little or no price validity, and in-country freight is escalating, as mentioned. Also, the majority of products are traded globally in either USD or Euro, and those currencies are volatile, actually favouring the Australian dollar at the moment. And finally, Brendan, to finish on time. Operational implications. So most of our issues are around supply of goods. Operation, the biggest issue is actually fuel availability, the ability to ship the goods to site, or for construction staff to physically get to site and do the works. Interestingly, in a petrol station today in country Victoria, limited to 400 litres of fuel for any transaction. We have a project, we're about to start a critical phase. Our customer ordered a small tanker load of fuel, and the order was rejected this morning when it was supposed to be shipped. Can't physically buy the fuel to start the works on site. That's my contribution, Brendan.
Okay, thanks, Graham. And we're seeing a couple of questions pop up in the chat already, so keep them coming in. There's a couple there around the pressures on site, Graham. So please, put the questions in the Q&A box. Last speaker is Glenn Gillen. So Glenn from Solmax will just provide your viewpoint and wrap us up.
No worries. Thanks, Brendan. So I'm from Solmax Geosynthetics. We manufacture and supply all sorts of geosynthetics from around the world. There we go. So Solmax, we all corners of the globe, we have manufacturing facilities and locations. So in this part of the world, there's sort of Australian markets we're all focused today, and particularly on geomembrane. Some of the other speakers have spoken about geotextiles and geogrids and so forth. So I'll talk predominantly about polyethylene and geomembranes. And most of that material, as anyone's probably looked at a world map lately and seen the impact of when you close the Strait of Hormuz, and how that sort of the global impacts and supply chains and how everything moves around to our part of the world's heavily impacted. So luckily, from a Solmax point of view, we've got different plants around the world and therefore pre-qualified resin, so we have access to other material, even though it's where we'd normally get it from is heavily restricted. We can find it from other locations. I'll put this graph here just to show some people other people have shown graphs. With polyethylene resin, we came off really to the start of this year, start of 2026, we came bottomed out in pricing, a record low pricing on raw material, which then flowed into finished goods. And the market would have seen that and perhaps became accustomed to such low competitive pricing. Now that's drastically turned, and so that really prices had nowhere to go but up. And this has been the catalyst to create them. And as the margins are very skinny within the market, within this whole supply chain, they had to be passed on to the end user. So it's a really, really big impact, as we've seen. And if the simplest way to get everyone sees the petrol station prices, it's closely linked to oil, as people have mentioned. It's a derivative, or all resins to make geosynthetics are derivatives of oil or crude oil. So as soon as you see the petrol price change or diesel price, expect your geosynthetics to follow in a similar fashion. 60–80% of the cost of a geosynthetic is the raw material. So it's commonly, obviously, a manufacturer, and most of the manufacturers on here would be having these regular conversations with customers. Everyone's quite baffled, and it came so quickly, these drastic price increases. So you understand global politics in a much deeper level than we ever thought we needed to or had to. And so the question always comes up, well, why are they so expensive and how can they be made cheaper? So very simply, when so much of the cost is the raw material to make such a product, the other factors are really price, and there's very little labor component because they're very mechanized processes to make geosynthetics. You either put less in, you use less material, or you use lower quality raw materials. So that can be used recycled material that's lower quality, fillers, anything that you can get for a lower price, and you put it in. So if a price looks cheap, I'd be very concerned. Yes, there could be some people that had stock available, but that's going to run out very quickly. So in all geosynthetic manufacturers, the raw materials are turned over very quickly. If anyone's going to sit on a large amount of raw material, obviously that's capital tied up, and your machines wouldn't be running as efficiently. So it's unlikely that would be the case, particularly now that we're multiple weeks into this situation. So quality testing and reputation are essential for product conformance, long-term durability, and end-use performance, especially if CQA is involved. If a lower quality product or an unqualified product is used, and then failures occur, who's going to pay for that? So the value of quality can be felt long after the price paid is forgotten. So why is it impacted? If we hear like 20% of the global volumes have sort of been taken offline through the Middle East situation, it's only 20%. It's not 50%. Why is it such a big impact? Well, most of it that we use in this part of the world came from that section. So while it's 20% of global supply, it's much higher to sort of Australian or Australasian supply. And to switch a certain resin or certain type or certain raw material out, you need to pre-qualify the recipe and the raw material with performance testing, and those qualification tests take a minimum of 90 days just to perform the tests alone. So you kick the can another 3 months down the track once you've then got the raw material. So it's not as simple as just using anything, just putting any raw material in. There's certainly polyethylenes out there that are available, but you need to use the right ones to ensure you're getting a quality finished product. So can you get it? Yes, you can. Solmax are the world's largest geosynthetic manufacturer, so we have availability to source it, and we've got qualified resins around the world that we can get our hands on. So having confidence in performance is key. We have various supply partners, so yes, the ones in the Middle East are strained right now, but we can find it in other regions of the world. And we stress, as others have echoed this statement, get the orders in early so then we can guarantee the raw material stocks and ensure your project continues. So while the situation is different, we have solutions and works can continue. That's it from me. Thanks, Brendan.
Thanks, Glenn. Appreciate it. We do have a couple of questions. One comment has come in from a audience member saying that in terms of discussion around countries prioritising their own requirements, South Korea has already done it. A few days ago, they banned the export of naphtha, so that's tick that box. A question for Graham. How are clients responding to head contractors? Sorry, how are clients responding to contractors such as yourself, Graham, who are having to bear the cost of these increases? For example, are they willing to share the pain? Are there rise and fall clauses in contracts? Any thoughts on
really good
those
question.
discussions?
So contracting does tend to push that risk up the contract chain. Everybody from the oil producers all the way up, they push those risks up, and we do as well. So it is the end user that by and large is paying. At the moment, we haven't seen in the goods that we've sourced huge increases. They've been modest, although all the numbers have been presented just now. We're actually transacting at relatively modest levels. And our customers are mostly need to have the assets built, and they're pleased that we're finding ways to source the goods, and they're okay to pay a small premium at this stage. I think Andy said something about some projects might well get delayed. I think that will be the case. The less critical projects will get delayed, and we'll end up working on using the available goods on the critical important projects.
100%, Graham. We're already experiencing that in the last 3 to 4 weeks. We've seen things push out 6 months and see what happens. Yeah.
Sorry, Brendan, there's another example from meeting with clients today that they're starting to work out they need all the materials necessary to deliver a project, and any one supply stops the whole project. And so now we've been approached by, over the last week or so, quite a few clients wanting to early procure to make sure they can get all the goods for the project and press the go button. But these are all critical infrastructure projects, of course.
Sure, understand. And I'm sure your contract review time has increased as well. Another question here, a statement, then a question. I expect that the impact in Australia may be less, as Australia has quite a robust independent QA testing procedure, which is followed by the majority of consultants. Noting that some clients are not necessarily focused enough on third-party testing. What is the opinion of the panel?
Oh, Brendan, I have an opinion.
Well, you can go first then, Graham.
Yeah, I agree, but that doesn't stop substandard goods in current circumstances getting supplied and failing. It stops them getting onto the job. It doesn't stop them being procured.
Okay. Like maybe look towards one of the Australian distributors or players, Andy or Pete. Do you have any comments about that?
I can go, Pete, if you like. I mean, our organisation and other organisations, we source from all over the world. Like we do the Americas, North and South, Europe, India, Middle East, etc. We spend a long time, and as do other quality companies, making sure they're pre-qualified, all of these partners and all of these suppliers prior to any of this happening. But the risk then lies with us. So if something substandard does go through, well, that's our risk. That's on us to make sure that it is going to be compliant. It is going to be to the levels and the standards that the projects actually need. So yes, there is very robust independent quality testings, but it's the ownership is actually on the company that's bringing it in to make sure that it's going to be there. It's that ownership is not on the auditors or the consultants or the client. It's on the people that are actually choosing to bring this in. That's their responsibility.
Sure. And what you're seeing, Andy, by listening to you is you're not seeing the specification change to increase the availability of options. You're seeing the specification stay the same, and the challenge then is to meet that with the availability of supply.
I would say that's actually mixed, to be honest.
Okay.
So I've seen scenarios where geomembrane was not available for a job that was deemed critical, and the consultant reviewed an option of using a GCL that had a polymer coating on it. So therefore, he still got the two materials that they wanted, albeit in a different mix and form, and the consultant was happy with that combination. I've seen other scenarios where they want, let's say, BEPM-related standards, and they're not prepared to bend or high stress cracking values, for example. And they've designed it because they deem it a high risk or a high critical thing. So therefore, the decision is made to delay that job. So we're seeing quite a mixed reaction from the market, I would say. I'm not sure if Peter's experience is the same, but that's ours.
Yeah. Look, from a manufacturing perspective, I mean, we've got a panel of suppliers of raw materials which we've pre-validated and from a quality perspective a long time ago, not post the crisis. So, we certainly haven't had to make any compromises on materials we have either sourced or have had in our and certainly some of our suppliers are not suggesting anything different. Now, I haven't seen that change, but I know with geomembranes it's a little bit more sensitive, and the raw material source is critical. GCLs, I mean, the clay is sourced locally, so there's no sort of changes in any supply chains there. So from our perspective, so far we haven't had to make any compromises in quality to fit a specification. And I would assume largely most of the industry, as Andy said, we cross-validate, and we've been doing that for a very long time. We just don't bring product in off a data sheet. We do our internal checks and balances.
Yep.
No way.
Okay. We've got a couple more questions here. One, I guess a general one for the panel is, what kind of price increases are visible in different parts of the world, especially the USA? And then how much of that is the market absorbing, and what's the outlook on this topic? So I'm not sure who's got visibility beyond ANZ and Southeast Asia. Probably eyes on Boyd and Tom, perhaps, or maybe Glenn.
Yeah, I can jump in. I've seen pricing out of the US similar to, again, it depends on the material, the specific product, but we certainly see freight across the world's gone up with the oil prices. But even just the raw materials, generally 30 to 40%, we're seeing increases in product in this part of the world. We're seeing minimum 20% in the US. So nowhere is unaffected.
Brendan, this goes back to my comment of we're all in this together. You're not going to regionalize. There's not going to be a bargain in some other part of the world that you can, ship and get around it. This is a global issue.
I think, Tom, you gave us insight into Europe before.
Yes, and I agree absolutely with what Boyd says and what Glenn has said. There's nowhere in the world that's escaping for this. The degree is a little bit different, largely around shipping costs, but there's really not much in it. I think it's going the same way, to more or less the same degree for everybody.
Yeah.
Maybe just the timing will be a bit different.
A general question again. With Middle East refineries and oil fields and general infrastructure significantly impacted, and given that even after the war stabilises, there is limited visibility on oil prices returning to 2024 or 2025 levels, what is the expert's opinion on the future direction of material and freight cost and overall prices? So I don't know. So there's two parts to it. One is freight, Brian, and one is on the I guess the oil price or the product side. So maybe, Brian, we give you a minute or so to give us some thoughts on what could come on freight.
The world scenario as far as freight goes is controlled basically by 6 shipping lines, and as much as they say there's no collusion, it's no accident that it's a bit like the domino effect. If one increases rates, the others all follow very soon after. I don't see the rates necessarily going back down. I mean, okay, we're now in the blue water trades into vessels of 24,000 TEU and above, which gives them an enormous opportunity in terms of scale to rationalise their pricing quite significantly. But you got to remember, these shipping lines have got stunningly massive investment, and we see figures where in quarters they're back to only making 3.8 to about $5 billion a quarter, which certainly sounds a hell of a lot of money, or it does to me anyway. But the long and the short of it, I don't see the long-term freight costs reducing at all. I think we're going to be going along at the current rate we're sort of going. Sure, once the war finishes, the increase in the surcharges will most likely slow down to a bit of a stop, but it'll be determined by supply and demand, and what the the world economic outlook is. I mean, the more trade that occurs, the more volume. You know, that may change things too. I mean, who really knows? I mean, shipping is a bit like putting your hand in a box and seeing what you pull out. You never know.
Yeah. Okay, and maybe just on the oil price side, Boyd, you made a comment at the start, something along the lines of this is your fourth crisis.
Yeah, there is a normal volatility in oil and resin pricing. It moves up, it moves down. You know, this is being propelled by an external event. But if I knew what gas or resin prices were going to be, I wouldn't tell you. I'd shorter long the futures. So.
Yeah. Okay, but in your experience of the previous events, is it one of those cases where you go up quickly and then come down slowly?
Yes. The answer to that is yes. When it goes up quick, it doesn't come down quick.
Yeah.
I think if I could add to that just quickly, Brendan, on the oil price, it isn't, even if the war was stopped tomorrow, you know, it's going to be 6 to 12 months before the oil price is stable again, because some of the production facilities have been shut down because they've got no storage. And it takes a long time to get an oil well up and running again. On LNG, there was a big attack on the plant in Qatar last week. Estimates of getting that up and running are from 1 to 5 years until that's fully back up to capacity. So we're going to be in a situation where there is constraint on supply, and it's the most basic law of economics. When demand exceeds supply, the price goes up. And it's going to stay there until that equilibrium comes back, and that is going to be many months, if not years.
Sure. Just the last two questions. I'm conscious of time. Question for Solmax from someone specifically. Do the various resins you can source produce BEPM compliant geomembrane? So that's a very, very targeted question, yes. Glenn. I don't know what the background of that is, but
yeah, the answer would be yeah. We can source all sorts of resins, so you can get ones that aren't compliant, but certainly the ones we bring to Australia are compliant.
Sure. And the last question, a philosophical one, a little bit apt because we've got Boyd, who's I think you've contributed many years to the IGS, Boyd, and you're still involved with the foundation. And Graham's the current president of ACIGS. Given the current geopolitical conflict and shipping disruption has significantly affected geoliner supply and pricing, what role, if any, can organisations like ACIGS play in advocating for more stable supply chains through industry or government channels? So,
you want me to go?
You have a swing, Boyd.
There have been conflicts that have been prevented by government interests. You know, India and Pakistan saber rattled a few years ago, and businesses stepped in and said, you know, look, this is bad for business, and that's the exact same situation we're in now. What's going on from a business perspective is horrible. But this goes back to my question of, is this a religious war, which is a different kind of problem, or a war on resources and politics? The business community can put pressure on governments, elected leaders, et cetera, to say, you know, look, what you're doing is harming my business. And from a capitalist perspective, this is bad. I hope that we're in that category of conflict. You know, we can join a whole bunch of other voices from the business community saying this activity is not good for us.
Yeah. Particularly supplying critical infrastructure projects for a nation.
Yeah, well, and it's you know, the helium thing's going to roll over into the chip industry, which is, you know, we're quite widespread with infrastructure, but electronics go, you know, they touch almost everybody on the planet.
Okay. Graham?
From an ASICS point of view, this is an example of things that we are doing, which is to help inform industry, inform our customers, encourage dialogue between buyers and suppliers. So there is some value. There's a valuable contribution we can make there. In terms of influencing government, I don't think we ASICS have any significant influence over government. And I think the biggest threat to projects proceeding is probably diesel, rather than securing the raw materials. And kind of a couple of examples I gave earlier today. One of them was a really fundamental infrastructure project in Sydney, and the consequences of not continuing would be enormous, absolutely enormous, and yet denied access to fuel at the moment. I suspect that will get resolved relatively quickly, but it's a good example of where the biggest threats to us continuing with our work lie.
Sure. Okay. We're coming up to the end of it, so there's no more questions to be asked. So I just want to thank everyone on the panel for their contribution and time. Appreciate the preparation and you're making yourself available, sharing your insights and experiences, and thank everyone for participating today. It was fun. We've been there before over the years, and we'll get through it. And I'm sure it'll all come good sometime in the future. Just not sure when. So, thank you very much from ASICS. Thank you very much from the IGS, and enjoy the rest of your afternoon or evening.
Thanks, Brandon.
Cheers all.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Cheers.
Paul.
Bye-bye.
Brendan.
Right.